A new nanny comes to town and a doll is turned into a baby. Stay tuned.
I'm Maria Menounos, and you're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz.
Hi,
Hello.
thanks for joining us. Welcome to the after show for The Servant, Episode 1, Season 1, Reborn. I am here with my wonderful co-host, horror enthusiast and M. Night Shyamalan fan, Brandon.
Yeah, super happy to be here. Huge Shyamalan fan, huge horror fan. Really excited to get into this episode.
Super excited to have you here. I definitely could not do this without you, so thanks for joining. And I'm LaToya Blakely. I am co-hosting, and we are ready to just jump into it. So what are we talking about tonight? We are talking about our main characters that we are introduced to in this first episode. We'll also be talking about the relationship between Jericho and LeAnn. And then last but not least, that baby in the crib at the end of the scene. We'll also have news and gossip and special segments. So let's get into it. What were your overall thoughts of this episode?
I mean, I absolutely loved this first episode. I think it was a great pilot episode, especially for a new horror series. It definitely had that M. Night Shyamalan vibe to it, especially with him directing the first episode and even having his typical M. Night cameo, where he was actually the delivery guy for the seafood that was delivered to Sean. Creepy and like kind of awkwardly funny at the same time. And I mean, definitely let's get into these characters, right? I mean,
Yeah, I agree. I just thought that for a first episode, it did a really good job of like creating intrigue, right? Like I watched it and I was like, I want to know more.
yeah, 100%. For me, particularly, Sean, played by Toby Kebbell, really stood out. He's kind of this cliche horror character that we see a lot, where he's the husband or the boyfriend in a situation, and he's kind of the focal point. He's the audience in a sense, where he seems to be the only sane person in the room when all this other crazy stuff is going on. But he plays it so well that I just immediately got sucked right in.
Well, I think that's interesting that you define him as sane, because I'm starting to question him a little bit, but Brandon has done a good job of taking us into topic 1, where we are going to discuss our main characters. We were introduced to 3 main people in this episode, right? We have the wife, Dorothy, the husband, Sean, and then the new nanny, LeAnn. You've kind of already started. You kind of told us what you think about Sean, the husband. Would you like to add to that, and what do you think about our other 2 main characters?
Dorothy is really intriguing. So we know that she had this mental breakdown, and she definitely, before we're even told that, we notice that there's something not quite right with her, the way she acts when the nanny first shows up. And then on top of that, the nanny is also acting really bizarre.
Okay.
Yeah.
So question, why do you think her behavior, Dorothy, was bizarre in the beginning?
She was like smiling too much, and like her eyes were like really wide when she spoke, and she was like almost too intrusive, asking too many personal questions to the nanny. And you can kind of see Sean just sitting in the background like, whoa, like slow down a bit. And yeah, and then of course the way it's directed by M. Night Shyamalan, we see these shots where Dorothy is just like staring into the camera, like almost directly at the viewer, and it freaked me out.
Well, I think that's interesting, and I'm smiling so broadly and big because I think it's interesting how Brandon has described these 2 characters. Sean is the sane one, and Dorothy is bizarre in the beginning. And I actually thought it was the opposite.
Really?
I did. I mean, I do agree that Dorothy was like over the top happy, and I was like,
Yeah.
wow, she is happy. Why is she so happy? And I thought it was a little odd how when there's a knock on the door, she goes down, or the husband comes down and she's talking to him and she's like, is that her? Do you think that's her? And I'm thinking to myself, why don't you just go to the door and see if that's her? So maybe there was a little bit of like odd behavior, but overall I just thought that she was extremely happy and like wanted this person there. I agree she was a little intrusive, but more so with like the physicality, how she's like helping undress her and like come right in. And I thought that Sean was a little standoffish.
Oh, he definitely was. He's a jerk, 100%.
Yes.
But I mean, he's a sane jerk. At least that's how we're painted how his character's painted in this first episode.
Well, I don't know if I would use the word sane. I think that I would say that he is aware, right? Like
sure, that's actually a perfect
right.
word
Like he
for that, yeah.
knows what's happening. What do you think about LeAnn?
LeAnn is also. I don't know what to think of LeAnn. When she first shows up at the door, she doesn't even introduce herself. Just kind of stands there very quietly until Dorothy is like, are you LeAnn? And she's just kind of like, yeah, and just walks in.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre.
Right? I agree. So LeAnn was a little creepy to me. I think that when I saw her praying, like that gave me a little context. And I was like, well, maybe she's not creepy. I think by that time we learned her age. She was 18. She's praying. Like maybe she's just kind of sheltered and young and super Christian or religious. And like that's kind of why she's so quiet. But she is the most like mysterious. Like it seems like she's hiding something. There's a secret.
Sure, and like I think they did a great job of that in this episode where you don't really know which side of the fence she falls on. Like, is she super creepy? Is she just this very conservative, quiet young girl who just likes to keep to herself? Like, is there something more? Maybe is there something supernatural going on? Like, we don't know.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on to topic 2, I just want to say thank you to everyone who listens. Thank you for making AfterBuzz TV the ESPN of TV Talk. You can find us on YouTube and all of your favorite podcasting platforms, though since this is a new show, it may take a few days to show up. If you're on YouTube and you like what you're hearing, we ask you to please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating. We couldn't do this without you, and we just thank you so much for joining us. So moving right along, we're going to move right into topic 2, Jericho and LeAnn. And so Jericho's this baby, right? And we found out that Jericho isn't a real baby.
No, that was a pretty shocking reveal, especially
Right?
for someone like me. I went in completely blind. I didn't see any of the trailers, any of the promotional material.
Me too.
When he just smacks that baby's head against that crib, I gasped.
So did I, right?
Yeah.
And okay, at first I was like, wait, what? And then I was like, okay, it's a doll. But then I'm starting to wonder, well, okay, like, where's the baby? Like, maybe there's a surrogate and the baby's about to be born and, like, they brought in a nanny before. And then no.
No.
That's not the case. So what did we learn? We learned...
Yeah, I mean, it gets even weirder. We learned that, unfortunately, they had this horrible tragedy where their baby passed away. I believe it was like 11 or 18 weeks or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And Dorothy had a complete mental breakdown. And the only way that Sean and the family knew how to handle it was to give her this, was it Reborn?
Afterlife, I think is what the doll was called, like an afterlife
a
doll.
reborn child, or yeah, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And it's just this doll. And it's just super weird where Dorothy just believes that it's a real baby and Sean just has to play along.
Right. So this is very interesting, right? So this doll has taken the place of the baby that died at 13 weeks. And I only remember that because I calculated the math. It was like the baby's about 3 months old.
All right.
And so, yes, like you said, Dorothy has had this deep depression, and the only thing that brought her back was having this baby, this doll, which now is her baby. I think that she 100% believes that this is her actual baby. And they never had a funeral, it sounds like, for the baby that they lost. They just immediately brought in this doll, and the doll took the place. Sean realizes that this is just a doll, but he's going to play along for the benefit of Dorothy. LeAnn shows up. When we first see LeAnn with the baby, the doll, she's treating it like it's a real baby, right?
Yeah, and that's even before we're really 100% certain what's going on. You're like, is this a real baby?
Right.
I don't really understand. And then finally we do have that sit-down conversation between Sean and LeAnn's sitting there like patting the baby and like, you know, like rocking it to sleep. And Sean's just like, all right, you could like stop it with the act. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, what?
Right.
Yeah.
So that was super surprising to me that LeAnn's going along with it.
Yeah.
And then I had the question of, why is LeAnn doing this? Like, is she doing it for Dorothy's benefit? Is she somehow enjoying this, right? So,
yeah, like, is she just playing along, or does she actually think it's a real baby just like Dorothy does?
so at this point, what did you think? Like, what did you think about LeAnn and Jericho?
I mean, I don't know. At one point, I was like, well, maybe Sean is the crazy one. Like, maybe it is a real baby, and he's the one just seeing it as a doll this whole time.
Yeah.
But we do have the brother of Dorothy, played by Rupert Grint, that comes in, and he kind of gives us a little bit of a reality check where he also is completely aware of what's going on, just like Sean is. So it's I didn't know what to make of it at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think that because we had found out that LeAnn was religious, and she had, I think by this point she had put the cross in the baby's room.
Yeah.
So then I started wondering, well, like, is she gonna turn this doll like back to a baby? But then I'm like, no, that's just weird. Like, is the baby gonna look like the doll? Is it gonna be a completely new baby? Like, what's really happening? So yeah, I think that I was just very thrown off by the relationship that LeAnn took to this doll and the way she was treating it and taking it on walks and talking to it and then asking Sean to look after the baby.
Yeah,
Even though Sean had made it clear that it was just a doll.
Yeah, and those handmade crosses that she would hang above the crib, that really made me start to wonder, like, maybe there is something supernatural going on. Like, is this doll alive after all? So it's, I don't know.
But speaking of Jericho and LeAnn, and then let's bring Sean back into it, that scene where he drops the baby on the floor, and then Dorothy is at the top of the stairs looking at him. That was the first time I think that I felt like creeped out in this episode. Like that, something about that was super like creepy and kind of scary to me. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I was totally creeped out by that. Like he just tosses it like it's a doll, like it's no big deal. Like almost unnecessarily, like he's trying to prove a point to himself.
Yeah.
And then he just looks up and LeAnn is just standing at the top of the staircase. Like he really just chucked a baby on the ground.
And then they made eye contact.
Yeah, they made this awkward eye contact. And then even you could tell, like, Sean is he's very creeped out. He's like, does she think this is a real baby that I just dropped?
And he picked it up.
Yeah, just in time for when Dorothy came back and he just, puts it
Right. So it seems like Sean may be a little afraid of LeAnn.
I mean, I would be.
A little bit, yeah, definitely. I think so. We may be a little too soon. I was going to go ahead and go into the end of the episode. But before we get there, what are some other thoughts that you had about the characters in this episode and the things that we learned?
Well, I mean, I thought the whole angle of Sean kind of being this stay-at-home, like, master chef that makes these recipes for restaurants was kind of an interesting angle. I feel like there's a lot that they could maybe do with that.
That's true.
Going forward, where he's always home with LeAnn, and he's always tinkering with some sort of recipe, and, like, who knows even what that could mean metaphorically, or if it can foreshadow something down the road. I thought that's a very interesting creative choice to make that his profession and how it kind of ties into the story.
I think we really learned a lot about Sean, and he was quite an interesting man. And so from the very beginning, he is not happy to have LeAnn there.
Yeah, he keeps referring to her. He's like, remember, like, she's help.
Right.
Like, she's not a friend. Like, she's not even, like, really just like a nanny. Like, she's staff at this house.
Exactly.
And, like, we are not to, like, interact or mingle with her, like, in any non-professional capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
So I feel like there was so much about Sean that we can talk about, from where he was crying in the nursery. I do want to come back to that and get your thoughts on that. But I want to follow up with the fact that he's a jerk and he's kind of creepy. From him checking her out when she was praying, to the wife then calling him out and being like, you're just upset that there's young butt here that you can't have sex with, and him being like, and her saying, you better not masturbate while she's in this house.
That was actually one of those like awkward, funny moments that you would typically see in an M. Night Shyamalan movie, where you're just like, I'm kind of laughing, but it's an awkward laugh.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, is this supposed to be funny? I forget. He's like, just try and stop me or something to that effect, and I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah, I do think that we kind of got some hints about the relationship between Dorothy and Sean. Like, in some moments, they seemed like they were kind of on the same page and really supported each other. And then at other times, it seemed like they were kind of at odds and maybe in conflict with each other. Even the bathroom scene, when Dorothy's in the bathtub and Sean's on the toilet drinking the wine, and they just seemed almost adversarial in their conversation.
Yeah, they're definitely very estranged, but at the same time, you can tell they're also like supportive of one another. Like I feel like after the mental breakdown, Sean could have left at any time, but for whatever reason, like he's still there and he's still putting up with this whole charade of carrying around a fake baby every day.
Well, it's his wife, so I hope that he wouldn't have just left at any time.
Of course, but I mean, like you could but he definitely seems like the kind of guy who almost would. Like he's constantly drinking, like all the time. It seems like every time he's on screen, he's got a glass of wine in his hand.
But that's just an occupational hazard. Like he has to know what goes with the recipes, right?
Yeah, of course. But I don't know. He seems like the kind of guy who would, but yet he's still there. So I think it's interesting. Like it's this balance of sometimes they seem like they're supportive of one another, and then other times they seem like they almost want to fight one another.
For sure. And so going back to him crying in the nursery, what did you think about that scene, and what do you think it meant?
I mean, I thought that was a very like powerful scene because, I mean, up until that point, we really don't see that vulnerable side of Sean. Mm-hmm. Like he's just like kind of very like standoffish, has an attitude, is like very calm, doesn't really care about anything. And then he has that moment, and of course it's like right after we realize he's holding a doll, and it's like a really creepy doll. You don't even know what to make of it at first. Like,
right.
You're like, I hope that's a doll.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
So I thought it was our, I guess, introduction to the story, really, of that's where we really begin to find out what exactly is going on in this house, because up until that point, we don't really know anything.
Right. Right, and so we have that scene before we find out the actual situation in the house. And I think that after we found out what happened, and I reflect upon that scene, my initial thought is that Sean is still in mourning over the loss of his child. And because they never actually got to mourn or have a funeral, they just pretended like it didn't happen, then perhaps he hasn't been able to like deal with those feelings. But after that, he's so like cavalier about the whole situation and dismissive and almost crude that sometimes I like wonder how he actually feels. Like he almost talks about the death of the baby as like a thing that's happened, and now this is a thing that's happening, and I'm just ready to be done with all of it.
Yeah, I think those are actually a lot of great points that he hasn't really had a chance to mourn, especially not publicly. Yeah, at least that we know outside of his wife and his brother-in-law.
Right.
And so, and then even then, he can't really mourn in front of his wife because she thinks the baby's still alive at this point. So he can only really has these very private moments when everybody's asleep, and he can just kind of disappear for a few minutes, and then the rest of the time he acts like it's really not even that big of a deal. And almost maybe it's because he does have some emotional issues, which obviously he would. But maybe it's also because it's part of that act that he has to put on, where he has to pretend to Dorothy that everything's okay.
And you brought up the brother-in-law. What did you think about him?
He was interesting. I mean, first of all, I thought it would take me some time to get over that accent that Rupert Grint had to put on, because he was so used to him being Ron in the Harry Potter franchise. It's like I'm used to hearing this very thick British accent. He's like, almost puts on like a New York accent. I don't know I mean, they're in Philadelphia, but it's very like talks like this, and it's interesting. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely, like I said before, he is this other outside character that kind of like brings us back to reality a bit, because up until that point, we only really know the characters that are living inside this house in this very contained situation in this very small space, and we need an outsider to come in and kind of like tell us what's real and what's not, because like I said, like who knows, like is there something supernatural going on? Is that all in our heads? It could be anything at that point. So
yeah, I'm always amazed with how much you can find out about a person in such a little amount of time, or a little amount of like direct information given. And so to me, we learned some things about him. Like, while he can understand what's happening and the need for this doll, he also understands the need for her to like snap out of it and come to terms with what's actually happening, get some real help. So we know that he's like reasonable, right? And like has some good points, and he's pretty valid in what he's saying. But what was most memorable for me from that scene was the way he was like knocking back that alcohol and like throwing that glass down. So I think that also speaks to who he is, and maybe some habits and maybe some like background information as to who he is as a person and how he got there, because that was some serious drinking.
Yeah, but from both him and Sean, you could tell why they're friends.
Right. And that's probably a good outlet for Sean, to have the brother, to be able to talk to him, and to talk to him in an honest, accountable like way about what's really happening.
Yeah, and as far as we know, outside of him, is there anybody else to talk to? They did mention some doctor that he thought was a quack.
Which is the doctor, I think, that recommended this doll.
Yeah, but other than that, like, we have no idea who that is.
Right.
So.
Well, that brings us into our last and final topic, which is the cliffhanger and the end of the episode. So I think that Sean is in the basement, and we start hearing something.
Yeah.
Right? And as I'm watching and listening, I'm like, wait a second, did I hear a baby cry? Like, is that what I'm hearing? But I thought maybe it was just me. Like, maybe I imagined this and that's not what's really happening. But we find out that is what's happening. Like, Sean is hearing a baby. And tell me, how did the episode end?
Well, he goes upstairs, up to the crib, and finds a real baby inside the crib. And that's when everything gets nuts at that. Like, now, like, I didn't know what was going on.
And it was a cute baby.
Oh, of course.
It was a super cute baby.
Much cuter than the doll.
The doll was creepy. The hair on the doll.
Oh, gosh.
Was the creepiest thing about the doll. But yeah, so there's a real baby in the crib. And then the episode immediately ends.
Yeah. And of course, like, Sean doesn't know what's going on. The audience doesn't know what's going on. And that just brought me back to what I thought before. I'm like, maybe the doll was a real baby and Sean couldn't see it until just this moment. Like, what's going on? Did someone bring a real baby into the house? Like, is it like, I don't know.
I agree. So my first two thoughts were that LeAnn somehow brought this doll back to life, like turned this doll into the baby.
Yeah.
And then my second thought was LeAnn stole someone's baby.
I mean, it has to be one or the other, right?
Those were my two thoughts. So needless to say, this was a very information-filled episode. We met the main characters. We learned a lot about the main characters, but also I think it was set up in a way to where we have a lot of questions as to what's happening and like what's going to happen next. Do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, that cliffhanger definitely sucked me in. I just, like, the show could go in any direction now. Like, we still have no idea, like, what's going on. Like, I'm kind of, like, angling towards, like, maybe this doll really transformed into a baby somehow. I don't know. It's definitely a very Shyamalan twist at the end, which he's very well known for. I'm just really looking forward to continuing to watch this show and see where this goes.
So am I. I mean, it was such a good episode. I was extremely intrigued and, like, glued to the screen and invested in every character. So I'm very excited to finish this season and see what happens. Tonight, for our special segment, we are talking about our favorite horror movies. Brandon, why don't you go first?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, my favorite horror franchise of all time, really, I would have to say, is the Evil Dead franchise.
Okay.
I absolutely love it's in some ways kind of like a Shyamalan film, like Sam Raimi, who created the Evil Dead. He has this kind of quirky, humorous way about him. And of course, I also love a lot of the Shyamalan stuff too. Like, I'm even one of those people who loves The Village and Signs, and of course, you know, The Sixth Sense is a classic. But I mean, yeah. What about you? Do you
I'm gonna have to go with the last movie you said, The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
I feel like that was my first like scary movie. I think I was like 13 and I saw it maybe in the 7th grade with like friends. But I was so creeped out. Mm-hmm. It was so scary, and I'm pretty sure I had nightmares and like slept with the light on for a very long time. But it was such a good movie and like so well done. So that would have to be my favorite scary movie.
Yeah, I remember like seeing clips of it on TV as a kid, but never actually watching the entire thing. And that's also one of those movies that has such a famous reveal at the end, like probably one of the greatest twists in any film of all time, which is really what made Shyamalan known for the twist. And it's just one of those things where like it's so ingrained in our pop culture history now that it's discussed in other movies and TV shows, and it's almost impossible these days to see the movie before knowing the twist at the end.
Yeah, for sure. We have some great news in this episode.
AfterBuzz TV News.
especially great news for our fans out there and the fans of this show. Brandon, why don't you tell us all about it?
Yeah, so this show that, has both of us sucked in, Apple TV already renewed it for a second season before the first episode even premiered.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, so for everyone who has enjoyed this show, whether you're on episode 1 or you finished the season, just know that there are more episodes to come. There's another season that's going to be happening, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and hopefully it means we get to keep talking about it some more.
I'm excited. So once again, if you watch this show, follow us on YouTube, leave comments. We would love to read your comments and to answer questions or talk about your comments. And we're really excited to know that there's a second season coming. Once again, I'm LaToya Blakely. This is Brandon. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at BrandonHanna07.
Great, and I'm LaToya Blakely. You can find me on Instagram at LaToya.Blakely or on Twitter at Blakely.LaToya. Thanks for tuning in to Servant, Season 1, Episode 1, Reborn. Hope to see you soon. Until then, buzz you later.
Our founder, Keven Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz.